Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're beginning to tie up the loose ends before they unravel for Franklin, Michael, and Trevor in Grand Theft Auto 5. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. As Trevor returns from his vacation to North Yankton, he gets a call from Mr. Cheng, who seems to be under the impression that he's got a prisoner that Trevor is willing to negotiate for. His men picked up Michael and are holding him hostage, but they have sorely misjudged the relationship between the pair of men, as Trevor is far from ready to forgive Michael for his betrayal. Now, at first blush, it might seem like Trevor really does want Michael dead, but as we'll find out later, that isn't truly the case. He's angry and acting impulsive, which isn't abnormal for him, and he's letting his emotions drive his actions. And he has every right to be angry, as Michael had been planning to have him killed. Put yourself in Trevor's shoes for a minute and imagine that someone who you thought was a friend decided to not only break up your partnership and friendship, but also to have you knocked off in a job that they set up specifically to have you fail. That is about as low as a person can sink. But we'll set the past aside for a minute, even if Trevor can't, and focus on the present, because he, Franklin, and Franklin's buddy Lamar have one more job to do for Devin Weston. Franklin, mostly single-handedly, has managed to get all of the cars on the list, and they now have to deliver them to a spot near Paleto Bay. It's a rather long drive, and Franklin winds up taking a nap as Trevor regales Lamar with the story of his life, or at least the fun parts. Well, okay, it isn't even that. It's more of a therapy session between Trevor and Lamar, where Trevor has the chance to talk through his grievances as they roll down the LS freeway. It's honestly kind of a wild conversation, and Lamar actually seems like a much better therapist than that guy that Michael goes to. If he really wanted to, he could probably charge a similar rate and make bank, but that's getting way off topic. Just as they leave the outer limits of Los Santos, the police show up and we get a little bit of Trevor's action movie flair from Franklin as he takes one of the cars from the back of the truck and uses it to shake the tail from their little convoy. He manages to get rid of the last cop just as they reach the drop-off, but things don't go as planned as Devin's assistant Molly tells Franklin they won't be getting paid. Devin is supposedly holding on to the money and investing it for them, and this is the last that we'll see of Mr. Weston, at least for a little while. Finishing the job, the trio part ways, and Franklin gives Lester a call as he's starting to worry about Michael's whereabouts. Lester says he's able to track Michael's phone to North Yankton, but he isn't sure what happened there or where he presently is, and he promises to send Trevor over to meet Franklin and talk about it. Before heading over to meet with Franklin and put his anger at Michael to rest, Trevor winds up spending a little time in the desert as we take a slight detour from the main story. See, there are a ton of side missions and activities for each of the protagonists to involve themselves in. And there is one for Trevor in particular that fits very well into the Philosophy and Ethics series. As he's cruising around the desert, Trevor runs into a pair of guys who appear to be peeping into the window of a parked van. And upon walking up to them, he finds out that they are part of a group calling themselves the Civil Border Patrol. Well, I say group, but it's actually just the two of them, and one of them is apparently Russian? It's honestly kind of a mess, and they are clearly being built as a caricature of one real-life group or another. But they also give us loads to look at and talk about, because while this whole thing, which includes 3 missions with these nitwits, is meant to be played off as a joke, some of the things they say and even do are actually very relevant in 2026. First of all, in case it isn't abundantly clear from the fact that the English-speaking guy seems perfectly fine with the Russian-speaking guy while also going after people he says are Mexican, these guys are white supremacists through and through. They mask that by claiming that they are going after criminals and drug dealers, but we are smart enough to see through that smokescreen and call them out for their bigotry. And that kind of rhetoric has been used all throughout history and was especially prevalent in America in the mid-20th century, among other times, as politicians and certain groups used the excuse of things like a war on drugs and a war on terror to illegally support their crusade against people they didn't like for one reason or another. This usually boiled down to skin color or nationality, but could also be used to justify actions and hate against groups like anyone in the LGBTQ+ community or along gender lines. Going up to the very highest levels of government in the United States, there were several presidents throughout history that held racist ideologies, including famously Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, who were even recorded using racist tropes and slurs. Nixon went beyond rhetoric, however, with his war on drugs, which targeted communities of color under the guise of rooting out the problem of drugs and crime in the United States. But Nixon wasn't the first to use drugs as a way to target groups on the basis of race, nationality, or ethnicity, as things like opium were targeted in the late 19th century as a way to target Asian immigrants, and cannabis was used to target Mexican Americans and migrants in the 1910s and 20s. The reason for this is rather simple. White supremacy and racism aren't popular among the populace at large, but public safety is. And that brings us to the next point here, because often these policies and charges against various groups are fueled by fear. And that fear is the thing that drives the hate more than anything else. It might be fear of being killed, or a fear of the corruption of some widely held practice or belief, or a simpler fear like losing one's source of income to people who are coming in from other places. And you know that fear is the goal because they'll use terminology like a flood of immigrants or say things like they're coming to replace you in their speeches and messages. These things are effective because they oversimplify the problem into something that anyone can understand and give people a target to focus on. And it's important to point out here that in the past, it was hard to combat this kind of misinformation that drove the fear, as the flow of information was controlled by the people in power. If they wanted a specific narrative spun, they would hide anything that ran counter to what they were saying. In the present, however, it is a lot easier to find the information if you know where to look and pay close attention to the reliability of the sources. For instance, the idea that immigrants bring up the crime rate, an idea that has been shared for decades, is blatantly, provably false. And, in fact, the exact opposite is true. Research has been conducted by dozens of credible, reliable sources, and it only takes a few minutes to check it. I bring that up because it's important for each of us to take the time to really dig into these kind of issues, because they directly impact our lives and the lives of people in the world around us. The actions of these two guys that Trevor runs into in GTA are played off as a joke, but the reality is much darker, as we've seen people just in the past year in the United States being targeted by agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol because they looked or sounded like they didn't belong. People's lives are being upended based on lies about how people from other countries hurt the economy or cause increases in crime, and it isn't okay. And even Trevor sees through the BS, as after just a couple of missions with the Civil Border Patrol, he's had enough and decides to put an end to the bigotry. I wouldn't say this on a regular basis, and I never imagined when I started breaking down this story I would be speaking these words, but in this specific instance, we could all stand to be a little more like Trevor Phillips. After dealing with the scum of the earth, Trevor makes his way to see Franklin at the behest of Lester, though he doesn't have much in the way of helpful information. He does reveal that Michael may or may not have been taken prisoner by some old business acquaintances of his, and as he leaves, Franklin gets back on the phone with Lester, who finds Michael's phone has magically come back online and started pinging. I say magically because the timing is just perfection, though that's kind of a trope in media like games, movies, and TV shows, among other things, so I can't really ding the game too much for it. The rescue mission itself isn't really important here, though, as the point I want to focus on comes after Franklin has saved Michael and taken him back to his house. Franklin asks Michael for some kind of explanation for the recent events, and for more information about what happened between him and Trevor back in the day. And Michael shows just how selfish he is and has always been. His excuse for selling out his supposed friends was that he had something to live for while they didn't. He had a family at that point and wanted out of the game, and the cost to everyone else wasn't important to him. And I'm not just talking about the cost to Trevor, Brad, and Lester, as there was a cost involved in uprooting his wife and kids that often gets brushed over in these kind of discussions. See, we can go back to his drive in North Yankton and get a snippet of his conversation with Amanda as he's remembering the past that he'd rather forget. He has to convince her that making the deal with Dave Norton is the right call, and from the way he talks, it sounds like she doesn't even want to look at him, knowing he'd betray his partners like that. And we can glean from their arguments at several points in the game that Amanda really didn't want to leave North Yankton and go to San Andreas, as she seems miserable in general, and even says at one point that she left everything behind to go with him, implying she had a life and people that she knew and had to abandon. It's clear that the deal that Michael made might have spared his life in the short term, but the cost was much higher than the reward. And that's actually an interesting point, because many of us have been guilty at one time or another in our lives of judging the grass on the other side of the fence as being greener, assuming that if we could just make one major change or achieve one specific goal, that everything would be better in our lives and would be great. But in reality, achieving those goals and making those changes often just puts us into a new environment where we find out in short order that we still aren't happy. In Michael's case, he thought that getting out of the game alive would solve all of his problems, and the only way that he saw of doing that was to make a deal that involved the death and incarceration of his partners. In reality, he was never truly happy to begin with, and there was no amount of money or freedom that would solve that. But a deeper breakdown of Michael will have to wait for his Friend or Foe episode here on the channel in the near future. For now, we'll move on to what will hopefully be our final job with the FIB and pray that it goes as planned. The heat on FIB agents Haynes and Norton has reached a boiling point, and their house of cards is on the verge of collapsing. The IAA is onto them, and it's only a matter of time before all hell breaks loose if Michael, Lester, and Franklin aren't able to put the fire out. Literally and figuratively this time. The setup for this mission is intense, as we have to sit and watch cars pull out of a parking garage and scan license plates. Once the right car is located, there is a low-speed pursuit to engage in before the driver we need to talk calmly to finally makes it home and enters his house, where we can negotiate with him to take some time off work and loan us his suit and ID. Obviously, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but this is another one of those moments in the game where I kind of enjoyed the slower pace of it all. There is a time and place for chaos and destruction, and there are moments where it makes sense to kind of slow things down and build up to the chaos. The guy that we were tailing, and more or less robbing, was a janitor, and getting his clothes and ID is only one step in the setup, as we also need to track down the architect of the IAA building and steal the plans for that structure that he apparently just carries on his person for some reason. Honestly, it's a little weird that he would just be carrying them around, especially as he seems to be visiting another unrelated construction project when we find him. But maybe that's just something that architects do. Let me know if that's normal in the comments if you're an architect. Anyway, getting the plans is the final step in the initial setup for the job, and we have a couple of options to assault the building. We can either dress up as a janitor, plant some bombs, detonate them, and then return as fake firemen to steal the hard drive that the FIB agents want. Or we can go full-on action movie and parachute in, hack the drive, and fight our way out. To be honest, there isn't much thought to be done on this one. It's time to go big or go home. Parachuting in sounds like so much more fun, and of course that's the route that I picked. The job actually winds up being one of the more fun jobs in the game, as we get to land on the roof of a skyscraper, hack a computer system, have a shootout with government agents, and rappel down the side of a building before eventually escaping in the back of an ambulance that our amazing driver sourced to help us blend in. To top everything off, there was even a celebration to be had back at Franklin's house in the hills at the end of all of it, and things might have ended there if not for the final step of the job where Michael had to meet with Agent Norton. The meeting happens at the Courts Center, a building that sits overlooking the city of Los Santos. And while Michael thought that this would be the end of his involvement with the government, there wasn't really any way that he could have predicted how it would go. Well, okay, he probably should have seen the attack from the FIB, IAA, and Merryweather coming. But even if he'd seen all of that, there was probably no way that he could have known that Trevor Phillips would show up to save his life. That's right, Trevor comes in to save the day just when you least expect it. Of course, half of the people there are there because of him as well, so it kind of makes sense that he would have a stake in the moment. But it's almost touching that he would help Michael out here after everything that's happened. Of course, he isn't doing it out of the goodness of his heart, or some high road forgiveness for Michael's past transgressions. He's chipping in because he needs Michael alive to help make the job at the Union Depository happen. Yep, after all the crazy shit that they've been through, with Michael trying to get Trevor killed and Trevor leaving Michael to die at the hands of Mr. Chang's men, they are still going to team up to try and rob one of the most heavily guarded and fortified banks in the country. But that job, along with a few other loose ends, will have to wait for next week's finale for the Grand Theft Auto Philosophy and Ethics in Games series. That's right, we're closing in on the final episode of what has been one of the most chaotic and fun games that we've covered in the year since this series began, and the final ride with the crew might just be one of the most entertaining things that we've taken part in. To make sure you don't miss it, hit the like button on this video and subscribe to Lost in Games on YouTube. Once we wrap up GTA 5, we're heading on a cross-country road trip in The Last of Us Part 1, and you're not going to want to miss that or the Friend or Foe episodes that I've got planned for Michael, Franklin, and Trevor here on the channel in the coming weeks. If you're interested in getting early access to those videos, as well as some extra content and perks like having your name on the screen in videos, you can sign up for a channel membership here on YouTube, join as a patron over on Patreon, or sign up for the membership program I've got over on my website. Chipping in just a couple of dollars a month helps me pick up new games to cover and make bigger and better content in the future. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
And remember this, gentlemen.
If we pull this off, we will be making history.
Sordid, nasty, depraved history. But history, nonetheless.